press conference was Maria Hill's idea. 3 weeks of relative peace in Manhattan, no alien invasions, no rogue Asgardians, no multiverse bleeds, and the PR department at S.H.I.E.L.D. had decided that the Avengers owed the public a moment of normalcy. Tony Stark had objected. Steve Rogers had politely disagreed with Tony's objection. Thor had not understood what a press conference was until Happy Hogan spent 40 minutes explaining it, after which Thor had declared it a thing of tedious necessity and agreed to attend. The stage was set on the plaza outside Avengers Tower. August sunlight cut between the glass canyons of Midtown Manhattan, warming the crowd of journalists, civilians, and camera operators who had gathered behind the security cordons. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders holding hand-drawn signs. A vendor 3 blocks east was selling shawarma. Everything smelled like summer in New York, exhaust and hot concrete, and the distant sweetness of someone's street cart pretending to be a pretzel. Captain America stood at the podium. He was saying something about community partnership. Tony stood slightly behind him wearing sunglasses and an expression that suggested he would rather be literally anywhere else. Thor held Mjolnir loosely at his side, drawing the most smartphone cameras. Black Widow leaned against the stage railing with her arms crossed, scanning the crowd with the quiet professional habit of someone who never fully believed in peace. She was the first one to feel it, not see it. Feel it, a vibration in the soles of her boots rising through the stage platform, too rhythmic to be a subway train and too heavy to be anything she had a comfortable name for. She straightened. Her hand moved toward her earpiece, then the sky cracked open. There was no other way to describe it. 40 meters above 6th Avenue, reality simply split, a jagged vertical tear, crackling with dark energy that had no color anyone could agree on later when the witnesses were interviewed. Some said it was purple, some said black. One journalist insisted it was a color she had never seen before and could not name, and the therapist she saw afterward told her that was a normal response to dimensional trauma. From the tear, something fell. It hit the street the way a meteor hits the street, which is to say it did not land so much as it detonated. The shockwave flattened the first 3 rows of press cordons. Camera equipment cartwheeled through the air. A food truck 2 blocks away flipped onto its side. The stage itself cracked down the center, pitching Tony sideways and sending the podium skidding 15 feet across the plaza. The dust cloud was enormous. For 4 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody could see anything. The security teams had their hands over their ears. The crowd was running. Maria Hill was already on comms calling for evacuation and backup and medical, her voice perfectly level in the way that only comes from years of training yourself not to scream. Then something moved in the crater. It stood up slowly. Not with effort, slowly in the way that something massive moves when it is not in any hurry, when hurry is not a concept that applies to it. 7.5 feet of grey-white hide, dense as compressed stone, ridged with bone protrusions along the spine, the shoulders, the knuckles. A face that evolution had apparently decided should be mostly forehead and jaw, with deep-set eyes that held nothing recognizable. Not rage, not confusion, not even awareness in any conventional sense. Just a kind of absolute, bottomless readiness. Doomsday stood in the center of 6th Avenue and looked at the world around him. He had no memory of the tear, no understanding of the energy that had pulled him from one universe and deposited him in another. Those were not categories of experience that Doomsday processed. What he processed was simpler and more complete. There was a world around him, and the world was full of things that were not yet broken. That was a problem he knew how to solve. The first police cruiser arrived 40 seconds later. Standard response time for Midtown was actually impressive given the shockwave, and the 2 officers who stepped out with weapons drawn were brave in the specific way that people are brave when they have not yet fully understood what they are looking at. They shouted the standard commands. They held their ground. Doomsday looked at the cruiser, then he hit it, not with particular anger, not with strategy. He swung one arm in a motion that was almost casual, and the cruiser left the ground and became briefly airborne before it met the side of a parking garage at high speed and became something that insurance adjusters would later spend a long time looking at without saying anything. The officers were already behind cover. they were unhurt. This was not because Doomsday had spared them. It was because they had not yet registered as interesting enough to pursue. That changed when Thor landed in front of him. The Asgardian had crossed the plaza in 4 seconds, Mjolnir already crackling with lightning that whitened the midday sky and drew a sharp collective gasp from the civilians still streaming away down side streets. Thor planted himself between Doomsday and the retreating crowd with the uncomplicated certainty of someone who has stood between monsters and innocent people so many times that it has become less a decision than a reflex. "Creature," Thor said, his voice carrying that particular register, the one that silenced rooms and stopped charging armies. "You have arrived in a world under protection. I do not know your origin or your purpose. Speak if you are capable of speech, and we will." Doomsday hit him. The punch traveled approximately 8 inches and connected with Thor's chest with a sound like a building collapse. Thor left the ground. He traveled, by later shield measurement, 237 meters before he hit the glass facade of an office tower on 47th Street. The glass did not slow him appreciably. He went through it and through the interior wall and came to rest against a structural column on the 11th floor, which cracked but held. He was back in the air 12 seconds later, cape shredded, blood on his lip, lightning coming off him in sheets. "Interesting," he said. Iron Man was already moving. The Mark LXXXV had assembled around Tony during the initial chaos, and he came in fast and low over the avenue, repulsors charging. His onboard systems were running analysis even as he flew: height, estimated mass, bone density extrapolation from the impact crater, kinetic force of the Thor launch cross-referenced against known heavy hitters in the threat database. The database returned no matches. Friday, what am I looking at? Unknown biological entity. No match in any terrestrial, extraterrestrial, or extra-dimensional database on file. Estimated impact force from the Thor displacement event exceeds anything previously recorded from a biological organism. Recommend extreme caution. "Yeah, I got that part," Tony said and fired. 3 repulsor blasts, full power, center mass. They hit Doomsday and he stepped back. 1 step. He looked down at his chest where the blasts had struck, and the burned patches of hide were already closing. Not healing exactly, more like the skin was reasserting itself, thickening over the damage, becoming something that would not take the same injury the same way twice. Tony saw that happen on the sensor feed and felt something he did not often feel in a fight. He felt genuinely uncertain. "That's new," he said. Captain America arrived at street level with his shield up, coordinating the evacuation through comms while keeping eyes on the creature. His tactical mind was already mapping the engagement, the narrowness of the avenue, the civilian density to the north and east, the structural vulnerabilities of the buildings on either side. Every option he processed came with a casualty calculation he did not like. "Stark, what's our containment play?" "Working on it." "What I can tell you right now is that repulsors are making it stronger. Physically, I hit it 3 times and the 4th hit is going to hurt me more than it." A pause on the line. "Steve processed that. Thor, the creature strikes with a force I have rarely encountered," Thor reported, and he sounded more energized than alarmed, which was either reassuring or concerning depending on how well you knew him. "It is not strategic. It does not fight with skill. It fights with something older than skill." "You contain it, I am uncertain." 3 words from Thor that collectively meant, "This is serious." Doomsday had begun moving north. Not running, walking. That steady, ground-shaking walk that treated parked cars as minor inconveniences and fire hydrants as things that briefly existed and then did not. The bus turned onto the avenue, driver not yet aware of what was ahead, and Doomsday walked through it the way water walks through a gap, not stopping, simply continuing, the bus folding around him and spinning away in 2 directions. Black Widow reached the far side of the evacuation perimeter and found herself next to a young SHIELD field analyst named Danny Ito, who was standing very still holding a tablet showing the creature's path projection overlaid on a map of Midtown. "Tell me something useful," she said. "It's heading north-northwest," Danny said. His voice was steady, which she noted and filed away. "At current pace, it'll reach Central Park in about 11 minutes. The projection model assumes constant velocity, but he hesitated. It hasn't accelerated. It's been the same speed the entire time. It's not chasing anything. It's not running from anything. It's just going. Going where? That's the thing, Danny said. Nowhere specific. It's not navigating. It's just moving. She looked at the tablet, then at the smoke rising over 6th Avenue, then back at Danny. Come with me, she said. I'm not a field agent. I know, come with me anyway. He came with her. Later he would not be entirely sure why, except that Natasha Romanoff had a way of making the correct course of action feel self-evident. The real intervention came when Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America hit Doomsday simultaneously, a coordinated three-point strike that they had used against Hulk-level threats before with reliable results. Thor came from above with a lightning-charged Mjolnir strike to the skull. Tony hit from the left with a focused beam from the chest piece. Steve came from the right low with the shield aimed at the knee joint, trying to disrupt balance rather than cause damage. It worked. Partially. Doomsday went down on one knee, and then the adaptation happened in real time. The bone protrusions along his spine extended. New ones pushed through the hide along his forearms, dense, sharp, angled outward in configurations that had not been there 30 seconds ago. His skin, where the lightning had struck, had shifted darker, denser, with a faint iridescence that Friday's sensors clocked as a measurable increase in electrical resistance. Where Tony's beam had connected, the tissue had reorganized into something with a different molecular structure than the surrounding area. It's evolving, Tony said, not a question. In real time, Steve said. As we watch, Thor stared at his own hand, then at the creature. I have never encountered a living thing that grows stronger from being struck. I have, Tony said, and his name is Bruce, and we have managed protocols for him. This is not Bruce. Doomsday stood back up. The knee Tony had blasted, the one that should have been compromised, structurally weakened, held his weight without tremor. The bone around the impact site had reinforced. He looked at the three of them with those ancient, empty eyes, and something in his posture changed. Not aggression exactly, more like attention. As if for the first time since arriving, he had found something worth focusing on. He charged. The next 90 seconds were later described by Tony as the most expensive 90 seconds in New York real estate history, which was saying something given the city's documented relationship with superpowered property damage. 6 buildings took structural hits. A water main exploded. Thor was driven through a street-level subway entrance and had a brief, unplanned encounter with a 6 train that was mercifully empty of passengers. Steve's shield, vibranium, virtually indestructible, came back from the impact with a hairline stress fracture that Bruce Banner would later study for 3 weeks without fully explaining. They held him. Eventually. Thor's lightning, sustained and escalating, finally slowed the creature. Not stopped, slowed, and Tony managed a full-power sustained beam that drove Doomsday back against the facade of a building, that then very slowly fell over in the way that large things fall when all their structural integrity has been diplomatically removed. The dust settled. Doomsday was buried under approximately 4,000 tons of office building. For 11 seconds, nothing moved. Then, from beneath the rubble, something shifted. A hand emerged, then a shoulder. Then Doomsday pulled himself free of the debris with the same unhurried patience he had shown climbing out of his arrival crater, and he stood in the settling dust, and the bone protrusions along his arms had doubled in number and length, and his hide had a new texture that Tony's sensors could not classify, and his eyes found Thor across the wreckage with something that was almost recognition. "Okay," Tony said, hovering above the scene, his suit showing amber warnings across 6 structural systems. "New plan, we need one." Half a mile away, on the roof of a parking structure, a figure in a black tactical suit lowered a pair of binoculars. The figure pulled out a phone and made a call. "Tell him we found it," the figure said. "Tell him it's everything the dimensional readings promised. Tell him to prepare the acquisition team." A pause. "And tell him to bring something stronger than the last team." 3 blocks in the other direction, in the back of a SHIELD mobile command unit, Maria Hill was on a secure line to Fury. "Sir, we have a Category Omega event." Unknown entity, adaptation rate unlike anything on record, currently pinned under collapsed building on 47th Street and definitely not going to stay there. She listened. No sir, Thor is not enough. No sir, Hulk is not. She listened again. Yes sir, I'll make the call. She hung up. She looked at her team. Get me Banner, she said, and get me every piece of data we have on dimensional breaches in the last 72 hours. Something brought this thing here. I want to know what. And I want to know if it can bring something else. On 47th Street, the rubble shifted again. If you want to see more unstoppable monsters colliding with Marvel's greatest heroes, hit that subscribe button and drop what crossover you want to see next in the comments below. With great power comes great responsibility, and apparently great property damage bills. The rubble stopped shifting at 3:47 p.m. That was the part that worried Maria Hill more than the shifting had. Doomsday was under 4,000 tons of collapsed office building on 47th Street, and the seismic sensors embedded in the SHIELD mobile unit's ground array were reading 0 movement, 0 vibration, 0 biological activity that the sensors could detect. Which meant either the creature was dead, or the creature was doing something that did not register on any instrument they had. Neither option was comforting. Options, Hill said. The mobile command unit was cramped with people who all had opinions. Agent Coulson's replacement, a competent woman named Reyes who had the specific exhausted energy of someone managing their 4th crisis this month, was running atmospheric analysis on the dust cloud. 2 tech analysts were cross-referencing the dimensional breach signature with every recorded portal event in the last decade. Danny Ito was in the corner, still holding his tablet, still running path projections on a creature that was currently not pathing anywhere, because apparently that was how he processed stress, by continuing to do the job. Containment, said the first analyst. Full perimeter, 6-block radius, keep it buried. Pulled itself out of that crater in under 10 seconds, Hill said. It'll pull itself out of the building. Evacuation completion first, then controlled demolition of the surrounding structures to increase the weight of the. It got stronger every time we hit it, said Reyes without looking up from her screen. Adding more weight on top of it is feeding it. Silence, extraction and containment, said the second analyst. The raft. Deep underwater, reinforced. Moving it gives it a reason to fight, Hill said. Right now it's buried and quiet. The moment we try to move it, we start the fight again. More silence. Danny Ito cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him with the particular expression that senior staff reserve for junior staff who clear their throats during crisis briefings. The dimensional breach, he said. It's still open. Hill looked at her screen. He was right. The tier above 6th Avenue had narrowed to approximately 2 meters wide, crackling with that unclassifiable dark energy, but it had not closed. Standard dimensional breach protocol said a breach without active power input collapsed within 90 seconds. This one was 17 minutes old. It's being held open, Hill said. The other side, Danny said. The energy signature is directional. Something on the other side of that breach is maintaining it. He paused. I don't think the creature came through by accident. Mobile unit went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Tony Stark chose that moment to walk in, suit retracted to the gauntlets, holding a coffee that someone had handed him outside and that he had accepted on pure reflex. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that he had not addressed. He looked at the screens, looked at Danny's tablet, looked at Hill. Kid's right, he said. I ran the breach signature against every dimensional event in my own database going back to the New York incident. This pattern is different. It's not a natural tier, it's not a portal gun, it's not sorcery-based, it's something I haven't seen before. He drank his coffee, which for context is a sentence I don't enjoy saying. What is it? Hill asked, working on it. He set the coffee down. What I can tell you right now is that whatever came through was not the only thing waiting to come through. The breach has a load capacity. It was sized for something specific. He pulled up a holographic render of the breach geometry. One object, one direction, deliberate deployment. Someone sent it here, Steve Rogers said from the doorway. He had his shield on his back, the stress fracture invisible from this angle. and the expression he wore when he had already decided what needed to be done and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. Someone in another universe opened a door and pushed it through. "That's a weapons test," Black Widow said from beside him. "Or an opening move," Hill said. Outside, 3 blocks north, the rubble remained still. Bruce Banner arrived by Quinjet 40 minutes after Hill's call, which was faster than it should have been given that he had been in Calcutta, a fact he did not explain and no one pressed him on. He came into the mobile unit with his bag over one shoulder and his glasses pushed up on his forehead, and that particular careful stillness he maintained in situations where the other guy was not helpful and might actually make things considerably worse. He reviewed the sensor data. He reviewed Tony's breach analysis. He looked at the footage of the adaptation sequence, the bone growth, the hide reorganization, the tissue restructuring, and he watched it 3 times without saying anything, his expression doing something complicated. "Talk to me, Bruce," Tony said. "Adaptation mechanism," Bruce said slowly, "is not healing. That's the first thing to understand. Healing is restoration, returning tissue to a previous state. What this creature is doing is something else. It's incorporating damage, redesigning around it. Each injury becomes information that the biology uses to prevent the same injury from being effective again." He took his glasses off and cleaned them, which was what he did when he needed a moment. "In theory, a system like that has no ceiling. Every attack makes it more resistant to that specific attack. Fight it long enough and you run out of attacks that work. Room absorbed this, so we don't fight it," Steve said. "I don't know that we have a choice about that," Bruce said. "But if we do fight it, we need to fight it differently every time. Never the same technique twice. Constantly novel stimuli." He put his glasses back on, "which is exhausting and probably unsustainable against something that doesn't get tired." "What does it want?" Hill asked. "I don't think it wants anything," Bruce said. "In the clinical sense, I don't think there's a goal state it's working toward. The behavior pattern is it's closer to a force of nature than a motivated actor. It moves, it encounters resistance, it overcomes resistance, it continues moving." He paused. "The closest biological analog I can think of is an immune response. It's not angry, it's just doing what it does, and what it does is remove obstacles." Danny Ito had been very quiet in his corner. Now he said, "Where is it going though?" "The path projection, even accounting for random walk behavior, there's a directional bias. It's not just wandering, it's orienting." Everyone looked at the projection on his tablet. The creature's movement since arrival, plotted as a vector, extrapolated forward. It was heading toward Westchester. Bruce and Tony looked at each other. "Xavier's school," Tony said. "We need to make a call," Bruce said. The call was already being made. Though not by Shield 30 miles north in Westchester, Charles Xavier had been aware of the dimensional breach the moment it opened. A sudden flare in the psychic background noise of the planet, sharp and foreign, like a sound in a frequency no human ear was built for. He had been in a session with a student, and he had paused mid-sentence and gone somewhere behind his eyes for a long moment, and the student had learned enough about Professor Xavier's expressions to wait quietly. When Xavier returned, he had wheeled himself to Cerebro within the hour. What he found there was not a mind, not in any conventional sense. There was something, a presence, not thoughts, not emotions, not the warm or dark or complicated interior weather of a conscious being. More like the psychic equivalent of a stone wall, massive, undifferentiated, present in the way that geological features are present. Not alive in the way Xavier understood life, but not absent either. He told Scott Summers to scramble the X-Men. Cyclops had asked for a full briefing, and Xavier had given him what he could, which was something unprecedented had arrived. It was moving in their direction, and the Avengers had engaged it and were currently in a strategic pause. Scott had not asked any further questions. This was one of the things Xavier appreciated about him. The X-Men reached the edge of the exclusion zone that S.H.I.E.L.D. had established around the rubble site in 4 vehicles, which created a brief tense standoff with the S.H.I.E.L.D. perimeter agents that was resolved when Black Widow personally walked out to meet Storm and said simply, "Glad you're here." This was not a sentence Natasha Romanoff said to many people or often, and Aurora Monroe recognized its weight. Inside the mobile unit, The situation became, in Tony's word, complicated, by which he meant that the X-Men had their own ideas about approach, S.H.I.E.L.D. had its protocols, the Avengers had their existing tactical framework, and none of these three things were designed to interface with each other under pressure. It was Storm who cut through it. "We are wasting time debating command structure while a creature that grows stronger with every passing minute sits buried in rubble gaining strength," she said, and her voice had that quality it got when she was restraining the weather she could feel in the air around her. "What do we actually know that we didn't know an hour ago?" He beat. Then Bruce spoke. "We know it's a biological adaptation engine with no apparent upper limit on that adaptation. Oh, it arrived through a deliberately opened breach that is still open. We know it's orienting toward Westchester, possibly toward a concentration of psychic energy, possibly toward the largest nearby population of powerful mutants, possibly toward both. No, someone sent it," Tony added. "We don't know who or why." "We know," Danny said from his corner, and then stopped because several senior people were looking at him, and then continued because Natasha gave him a microscopic nod. "We know it hasn't killed anyone, directly. All the injuries from the initial engagement were from debris and shockwave, not from the creature targeting people. It went through that bus like it wasn't there, but the driver was pulled out without a scratch." He looked at his tablet. "It's not hunting humans, it's just moving through them." Silence. "That's either irrelevant or the most important thing anyone has said," Storm said. "I think it's the most important thing anyone has said." Xavier's voice came through the comlink from Westchester. He had been listening. "A being without malice is a being that can potentially be redirected. The question is whether there is anything it responds to other than physical obstruction." "You couldn't reach it psychically?" Scott asked. "There is nothing to reach," Xavier said. "But absence of mind does not mean absence of response. Animals with no higher cognition still respond to stimuli. The question is finding the right stimulus. If we can't," Scott asked, "then we do what the Avengers began doing," Xavier said. "We fight, but we fight smarter." Rubble on 47th Street shifted. Everyone in the mobile unit saw it on the monitors simultaneously. A single heavy movement, like something large adjusting its position. Then stillness again. Then another shift. Then Doomsday's arm came up through 4,000 tons of concrete and steel as if it were loose soil, and he pulled himself free for the second time, and he stood in the late afternoon light covered in grey dust that made him look like something carved from the street itself. He was different. Anyone who had seen him before could see it immediately. The bone protrusions had lengthened and multiplied. The hide had a new density that read differently even on camera, a texture that light struck at a slightly wrong angle, as if the surface was operating by different rules than the surfaces around it. He stood and he breathed and he oriented, and the direction he oriented was north, toward Westchester. "All units," Hill said into comms. "We are back to active engagement. All teams move." In the controlled chaos of the scramble, Danny Ito found himself running alongside Black Widow toward a Quinjet, which was not something his job description had ever technically included. She was checking her equipment with the automated efficiency of someone for whom preparation had become muscle memory. "You should stay in the command unit," she said. "You said to come with you," he said. "That was 2 hours ago." The offer had an expiration date. She looked at him briefly. There was something in her expression that was not quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. "Stay behind me," she said. "Do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. Don't try to be useful in ways I haven't asked for. Understood? Stop holding the tablet like it's going to protect you." He lowered the tablet. They boarded the Quinjet. Below on 47th Street, Doomsday was already walking. In a tower 17 blocks south, behind floor-to-ceiling windows that had survived the shockwave through a combination of reinforced glass and sheer architectural stubbornness, a man in green and purple sat in a high-backed chair and watched the creature's progress on 6 simultaneous screens. His face was still. His hands were folded. Around him, a team of the best scientific minds money could acquire, and Victor Von Doom's money could acquire considerable minds, were running their own analysis on the breach signature, the adaptation mechanism, and the creature's biological profile. Doom watched the footage of the 3-point strike. Watch the adaptation. Watch the bone growth in real time. Magnificent, he said softly. It was not a compliment to the creature exactly. It was the word of a man who had just seen a door open that he had not previously known existed. He stood. His armor caught the late afternoon light. Prepare the retrieval unit, he said. Non-lethal configuration. I want it alive and I want it contained. He paused. And I want the breach kept open. Whatever universe produced this creature may have more to offer. His aide hesitated. My lead, S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers both have active units in the area. The X-Men have mobilized. The risk of engagement is irrelevant, Doom said. They are all asking the wrong question. They are asking how to stop it. He turned back to the screens, watching Doomsday walk north through the wreckage of Midtown with that patient, eternal stride. I am asking what it can become. The first mistake was Reed Richards, not Reed himself, technically. The mistake was sending him in as a negotiator, which had been Xavier's suggestion, and which had seemed reasonable at the time given Reed's unique combination of scientific credibility and diplomatic experience with entities that existed outside conventional understanding. He had made first contact with the Skrulls. He had conversed with Galactus's heralds. He had once talked a sentient black hole into a different orbit through a combination of theoretical physics and what Sue later described as sheer stubborn optimism. Problem was that all of those situations had involved entities with minds. Reed arrived at the secondary perimeter in his Fantastic Four uniform with a portable sensor array, and the expression he wore when he was simultaneously excited and professionally obligated to pretend he wasn't. He reviewed Bruce's data, reviewed Tony's breach analysis, reviewed Danny Ito's path projections, and then he did something none of them had done yet. He walked toward Doomsday, not running, not in a combat posture, walking with his hands visible at a measured pace, his sensor array recording everything. Behind him at the perimeter, Black Widow had her hand on Danny Ito's arm to prevent him from doing something instinctive and unhelpful like shouting. Reed got to within 40 meters. Doomsday stopped walking. For 3 seconds, the street was completely still. Reed's sensors were running at full capacity, pulling biological data, energy readings, attempting to find anything in the creature's neurological structure that corresponded to a communicative function. His earpiece was live to the mobile command unit. Maria Hill was not breathing. Then Doomsday looked at Reed Richards, and Reed Richards' sensor array exploded. Not dramatically, it simply failed, catastrophically and completely, every component burning out simultaneously, as if the act of being fully analyzed by the device was something Doomsday's biology had decided to develop a countermeasure to in real time. The array sparked and went dark. Reed looked at it. Then he looked up at Doomsday, who was now 4 meters closer than he had been 3 seconds ago without anyone seeing him move. Reed Richards, who had faced Galactus and world-ending paradoxes and his own failed experiments with equanimity, took 3 steps backward. Interesting, he said into his earpiece. The adaptation mechanism responds to non-physical stimuli as well. Electromagnetic analysis. It detected the scan and neutralized the scanning instrument. A pause. I'm going to retreat now. That would be good, Hill said. Reed retreated. Doomsday watched him go, then resumed walking north. The failed contact attempt had one useful outcome. Reed's sensor data in the 3 seconds before the array burned out was the most comprehensive biological scan anyone had managed. Back in the mobile unit, he and Bruce worked through it side by side with the focused collaborative energy of 2 people who disagreed about almost everything except the fundamental joy of a genuinely difficult problem. What they found changed the tactical picture entirely. It's not just the exterior, Bruce said, highlighting a cross-section render on the shared screen. The internal structure is adapting as well. The skeletal density here and here, these are responding to Thor's lightning strikes. The bone composition has incorporated trace elements that are functionally similar to electrical insulators. And here, he moved to another section. Tissue around the repulsor impact sites has reorganized at a cellular level into something with a different energy absorption profile. It's not just getting harder to hurt, It's getting specifically harder to hurt in the ways we've already hurt it. Which means, Reed said, that every attack we've landed has been training it. We've been its teacher. How long before it's adapted to everything we have? Tony asked. Reed and Bruce looked at each other. It's not a question of time, Reed said carefully. It's a question of variety. The adaptation responds to novel stimuli. Familiar stimuli, things it has already encountered, it processes and neutralizes. Truly novel stimuli, things it has never experienced, require a new adaptation cycle. During that cycle, there's a window. Brief but real. Brief, Steve asked, based on the footage, 3 to 5 seconds from first exposure to completed adaptation for physical attacks, potentially longer for more complex stimuli. Reed paused. The question is whether we have anything left in our arsenal that qualifies as genuinely novel to a creature that has apparently been fighting its way through its own universe for long enough to develop all of this. Room was quiet. I might, Thor said, from the corner where he had been standing with his arms crossed and his expression distant. Everyone looked at him. There are techniques of Asgardian combat that have not been used in 1,000 years. Odin himself forbade them after the war with the frost giants. He paused. I do not know if they would be effective. I know they would be novel. What are they? Steve asked. Forbidden, Thor said simply, which is why they have not been used in 1,000 years. Thor, I will consider it, Thor said in the tone that meant the conversation was over. The political complications arrived slightly ahead of schedule, in the form of Secretary of Defense Marcus Webb, who appeared via secure holographic link looking like a man who had been in back-to-back emergency briefings since 2 p.m. and had not had anything to eat. President wants options, Webb said. We are developing them, Hill said. President wants options that don't involve half of Midtown Manhattan becoming a demolition site. That option is currently walking north on 10th Avenue, Tony said. You're welcome to go explain to it the political implications. Stark, with respect, Mr. Secretary, Steve said, cutting through it with the clean authority he rarely used and that always worked. The situation is being managed by the most capable people available. What we need from your office right now is 3 things. First, continued civilian evacuation support in the Northern Corridor. Second, no military engagement. Conventional weapons will accelerate the adaptation problem and give us a creature that is also resistant to missile strikes. Third, S-base cleared of everything except our units. He paused. Can we get those 3 things? A beat. Webb was a former general, which meant he recognized the difference between someone who was managing a crisis and someone who was performing management of a crisis. You have them, he said, and cut the link. Tony looked at Steve. Did you practice that? Every word, Steve said. It was during the second engagement attempt. A coordinated multi-vector approach designed by Reed and executed by Thor, Iron Man, Captain Marvel and Cyclops. Each attacking with techniques they had not previously used, that the real complication emerged. It came from beneath the street. Doom's retrieval unit had been moving through the subway tunnels since the initial rubble site, tracking Doomsday's progress through sensors embedded in Doom's armor suite, running parallel and below. The unit was 12 of Doom's best, not Doombots, not automatons, but actual human specialists in exotic biology containment, equipped with technology that Doom had spent 3 days modifying specifically for this purpose. The containment field they were deploying was designed to interact with Doomsday's adaptation mechanism, to present stimuli that would trigger adaptation responses, and then redirect those responses in directions Doom had predetermined. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, it worked for approximately 8 seconds. The field engaged. Doomsday felt it. The adaptation mechanism processed it. And then, rather than redirecting, it incorporated. The creature's bone structure along its lower extremities suddenly grew in a configuration that grounded the field's energy, neutralizing it completely, and Doomsday's fist came down through the street surface into the tunnel below with the casual thoroughness of something that had decided a problem existed and was removing it. 3 of Doom's specialists escaped. The rest retreated with equipment damage and a story they would tell for years. The tunnel collapsed in a 30-meter section. Doom, watching remotely from his tower, was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "It adapted to the field in 8 seconds. Yes, my liege. The field required 11 days to design." Another long silence. "Recalculate," Doom said. "Every assumption we made about the adaptation ceiling. Recalculate from the beginning." He turned from the screen. "And get me Richards." It was not a request anyone expected, and the aide's expression reflected this. "You want to contact the Fantastic Four?" "I want to contact Reed Richards specifically," Doom said. "Not the team, not S.H.I.E.L.D. Richards, tell him I have data from the tunnel engagement that he will want. Tell him I am proposing a temporary intellectual exchange." His jaw tightened slightly, which in Doom's case was the equivalent of a different man punching a wall. "Tell him I am not asking for help. Tell him I am offering a collaboration of mutual interest. He'll know it's the same thing." "Will," Doom agreed. "He will also accept because he cannot help himself. It is his greatest weakness and his most useful quality." Above ground, the second engagement attempt was producing results that were simultaneously promising and deeply alarming. Captain Marvel's photon blasts, genuinely novel to a creature that had never encountered that specific energy type, had a 3-second window of effectiveness before the adaptation closed. Thor's forbidden technique, which he deployed with visible reluctance and which produced a sound like reality being briefly renegotiated, had a 5-second window. Cyclops' optic blast, modulated to a frequency pattern he had never used before, had 2 seconds. They were chipping away, very slowly, at something that was not getting smaller, and then something happened that nobody had planned for. A bolt of Cyclops' optic blast, deflected by a new bone protrusion angle, struck a gas main. The explosion was significant, not catastrophic, but significant, and in the immediate aftermath, in the smoke and the debris and the momentary chaos of teams repositioning, a civilian appeared, not a bystander caught in the wrong place. A deliberate appearance, someone who had come toward the fight, not away from it. A teenager from the look of him, maybe 17, in a hoodie and jeans, standing in the middle of the street 30 meters from Doomsday with a look on his face that was either extraordinary courage or a complete failure to process danger. He was holding out his hand toward the creature, not as a weapon. Palm up, fingers open. The way you might hold your hand out to an animal you weren't sure of. Doomsday stopped. Not permanently, but stopped for 2 full seconds, which was longer than anything else had stopped it. The creature looked at the outstretched hand. Its expression, such as it was, did not change, but it did not advance. Danny Ito, watching from the secondary perimeter, grabbed Natasha's arm. "Do you see?" "I see it," she said, already moving. She reached the teenager in 6 seconds, coming in from his left at an angle that kept her between him and Doomsday. She did not grab him. She positioned herself beside him and spoke quietly. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," the teenager said honestly. He had brown eyes and a split lip from earlier debris, and he was looking at Doomsday with an expression that Natasha, who had spent a career reading people, could only describe as sorrowful. It doesn't feel angry. I know that sounds insane. I work with animals sometimes. My mom runs a rescue, and there's this thing you learn about animals in distress, where the aggression isn't aggression, it's fear, it's defense. And this thing doesn't feel angry, it just feels lost," Danny said, arriving behind them both. The teenager looked back at him. "Yeah, lost." Doomsday took 1 step forward. Natasha's hand went to her weapon. The teenager did not flinch. He kept his hand out. The creature stopped again. Its head tilted, a fractional movement, almost imperceptible, but real. Then Captain Marvel came in from overhead with a full photon burst. Because from her altitude she could not see the teenager, and the tactical picture had looked like an opening, and the moment broke. Doomsday's head snapped up. The adaptation window closed. He swung one arm in an arc that Carol barely evaded, and the engagement resumed. Natasha pulled the teenager back behind the perimeter with one hand and was on comms with the other. "Marvel, hold fire, hold fire." She clicked to the command channel. "Hill, I need that kid's ID run. Now." "Who is he?" Natasha looked at the teenager, who was watching the fight with that same expression, troubled, not afraid. "I don't know yet," she said, "but he just did something none of us managed. He made it pause." teenager's name, Danny found out 4 minutes later from the ID run, was Marcus Webb, not the Secretary of Defense, his son. 17 years old, mother ran an animal sanctuary in Westchester. Father was currently on a secure holographic link telling the Avengers what they needed. Marcus had heard the evacuation warnings, sent his mother north with the animals, and then come south toward the fight because, as he explained to Natasha with the particular earnest directness of someone too young to have learned better, it had seemed like the wrong direction was the one everybody else was going. "Your father is going to be very unhappy," Natasha said. "My father is unhappy a lot," Marcus said. "It doesn't stop things from needing doing." She looked at him for a moment. "Stay here," she said. "I mean it this time. You said that before. I have a gun this time." He stayed. The philosophical fault line cracked open in the mobile command unit at 6 p.m. when the second engagement attempt had been running for 90 minutes, and Doomsday was now 8 blocks further north and measurably harder to damage than he had been at the start. Reed and Bruce were presenting their updated analysis. The adaptation rate was accelerating. The variety of novel stimuli available to the assembled heroes was finite and decreasing. At current rate of adaptation, within 6 to 8 hours, Doomsday would be substantially resistant to everything in their combined arsenal. "So we stop fighting it," Storm said. "We can't just let it walk to Westchester," Scott said. "Why not?" Storm asked. "It hasn't killed anyone. It has caused extraordinary property damage, and it has responded to attacks with force, but every civilian injury in the engagement zone has come from debris, not from deliberate targeting. If we stop engaging, it might stop responding with force," Xavier said through the comm. "But we don't know where it stops. We don't know if Westchester is the end of the path or a waypoint. Don't know that fighting it accomplishes anything except making it stronger," Storm said. "We know that letting it walk unchallenged through populated areas is unacceptable," Steve said. "Is it?" Storm said, and her voice was not aggressive, it was genuinely asking. "Compared to the alternative, which is continuing to fight it until we have created something that none of us can stop at all." The room did not have a good answer to that. Into the silence, Tony said, "There's a third option." Everyone looked at him. "The breach," he said. "It's still open. It was opened deliberately. That means someone on the other side has a mechanism, controls, and if there are controls, there's a way to send it back," Bruce said slowly. "Or a way to talk to whoever sent it," Tony said. "Which I would argue is the more interesting option, given that they went to the trouble of sending it in the first place." He pulled up the breach analysis. "I've been running the energy signature against everything I have. I finally got a partial match 20 minutes ago. It's not in any terrestrial database. It's not alien in any way we've catalogued." He paused. "It's from a universe that shares a dimensional address with ours but operates on different fundamental physical laws. Specifically, and this is where it gets interesting, a universe where the power levels we consider extraordinary are apparently ordinary." Silence. "Someone from a stronger universe," Steve said, "sent the most dangerous thing in their universe to ours. As a test," Natasha said from the doorway. "He had come back from the perimeter. Or as a message. Or as a first wave," Hill said. Outside, Doomsday walked north through the early evening, and behind him, stretching across the darkening sky above 6th Avenue, the breach remained open, crackling with that dark, unnameable energy, and through it, if anyone had the instruments to look, which Tony Stark was currently building, shapes moved in the far distance of another universe, patient and watching, waiting to see what their first move had accomplished. The breach spoke at 9:14 p.m. not in words. Not in any transmission format that S.H.I.E.L.'s communication arrays were designed to receive. It spoke in the way that very large things announce themselves, through consequence, through the sudden and total failure of every electronic system within a quarter mile of 6th Avenue. Phones died, traffic systems went dark. The mobile command unit's backup power kicked in 3 seconds after the primary dropped, and in those 3 seconds Maria Hill stood in complete darkness, and listened to the sound of 17 people in a confined space all deciding simultaneously not to panic. The lights came back. The screens came back. Every screen showed the same thing. The breach had widened, not dramatically, perhaps half a meter on each side, the crackling dark energy spreading to fill the new geometry. But through the wider aperture, Tony's hastily constructed sensor array, assembled from salvaged shield equipment and 3 components he had printed in the mobile unit's fabrication bay in the last 2 hours, was now reading something it hadn't been able to read before: structure, pattern, intentionality. "It's a signal," Tony said, leaning over the array with the focused intensity he reserved for problems that had genuinely captured him. Highly compressed, non-electromagnetic, propagating through the dimensional membrane itself rather than through conventional space. "Which is," he stopped. "Impressive," Reed offered, from the seat beside him where he had been for the last 3 hours following Doom's data exchange, which had been conducted via encrypted channel and which neither man had fully explained to the rest of the room. "Terrifying," Tony said. "Impressive is the wrong word. Someone on the other side of that breach is using the dimensional membrane as a transmission medium. That requires an understanding of dimensional physics that makes everything we've developed look like a child's drawing of a rocket ship." "You decode it?" Hill asked. "Been decoding it for the last 4 minutes, Tony said. "It's not complex. It was designed to be decoded. It's meant to be understood." He straightened. "It's a greeting." Room went very still. "What kind of greeting?" Steve asked. Tony read from the screen. The translation was imperfect. His algorithm was working from structural inference rather than any shared linguistic base, but the meaning came through with a clarity that suggested whoever had sent it had engineered it for clarity. "Roughly, we have observed. We are interested. The specimen performs as calculated. We propose exchange." "Exchange of what?" Storm asked. Tony looked at the screen again. "It doesn't specify." "Which is either a negotiating tactic or a translation gap." He paused. "There's a second component, a coordinates package, dimensional address, our universe, not theirs. Local, the coordinates resolved to." He ran the calculation. 38 miles northeast of here, over the Atlantic. "They want a meeting," Natasha said. "They want us to come to them," Steve said. "There's a difference." "Coordinates they chose," Hill added, "in open water away from population centers." She considered this. "Either they're being considerate or they're being tactical," Reed said quietly. Everyone looked at him. He had been unusually quiet since the data exchange with Doom, and the quality of his silence had been the kind that meant he was carrying something he hadn't decided how to share yet. "I think it's both. I've been working through the dimensional energy signature with Victor's data included, and there's something in the baseline physics of their universe that I think explains the creature's behavior and the transmission method and the choice of meeting location." He pulled up a 3-dimensional model on the shared screen, a complex lattice structure, energy flows mapped in blue and gold. "In their universe, fundamental forces operate at approximately 60 times the magnitude of ours. Gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear forces, everything is stronger, which means everything that evolves in that universe, everything that survives, does so against pressures that would be extinction-level events here. Doomsday," Bruce said, "is apparently not their apex predator," Reed said. "Based on the energy readings, what came through that breach is significant in their universe. Dangerous, but not unmanageable. They sent it here the way you might send a probe. Something capable, something impressive by local standards, something that would demonstrate the differential." He paused. "They wanted us to see what their ordinary looks like." Silence that followed was the particular silence of a room full of very capable people all processing the same unwelcome conclusions simultaneously. "Above us," Tony said, not angrily, just precisely. "On the power scale, significantly. They want a meeting," Natasha said. "And Doomsday is still walking toward Westchester," Scott Summers said, from where he had been standing with his arms crossed and his visor tracking the creature's position on the tactical display. "Whatever cosmic diplomatic situation is developing, we still have a Category Omega entity 8 miles from a school full of children." It was the right thing to say, and Scott knew it, and said it anyway, which was one of the things that made him useful in rooms full of people who thought in large abstractions. "We redirect," Storm said. "Not fight, redirect," Steve asked. "Boy," Natasha said. Every head turned. "Marcus Webb," she said. He made it pause. "Twice. The second time was brief, but it happened again. I saw it from the perimeter before Captain Marvel's strike broke the moment." There is something in its response to him that is different from its response to everything else. She looked at Xavier's com-terminal. Professor, you said there was nothing to reach psychically. But what about something below psychic? Something more fundamental? Xavier was quiet for a moment. You're asking whether there's a biological resonance. Something in the creature's sensory apparatus that responds to what exactly? I don't know, Natasha said. But Marcus does, or he feels it. And right now, feeling it is more than any of us have managed. He's 17, Hill said. He's also the Secretary of Defense's son, Tony said, which means using him in any official capacity creates a political situation that... I'll talk to him, Natasha said simply. Not as S.H.I.E.L.D., as myself, nobody argued. This was partly because arguing with Natasha Romanoff about operational decisions she had already made was an exercise in futility, and partly because nobody had a better idea. She found Marcus at the secondary perimeter where she had left him, sitting on the hood of an abandoned car and watching the tactical air units circle in the middle distance. He was eating a granola bar he had apparently produced from his hoodie pocket. With the self-sufficient calm of someone who had learned early that waiting was easier with snacks, he looked up when she arrived. Going to ask me to do something, he said. Yes, something you can't do yourselves. He considered this. What happened to the gun threat? It's still available, she said. I'm choosing not to use it. He almost smiled. What do you need? She told him as directly as she could, the pause response, the twice-observed behavior, the hypothesis about biological resonance versus psychic contact. She told him what it would involve, which was approaching the creature again, this time deliberately, this time with the entire tactical response standing by, in case the pause did not occur. She told him what the risk was without minimizing it. She had learned from a long career of recruiting people for dangerous things that honesty about danger produced better outcomes than reassurance, because people who knew the real risk made real choices, and real choices held under pressure in ways that reassured choices did not. Marcus listened to all of it. Animal rescue thing, he said. What I told you before. My mom always says the ones that are the most dangerous are the most scared. And the way you reach a scared animal isn't by being stronger than it. It's by being present, just present, not threatening, not retreating, just there. You think that applies here? I think nothing else has worked, he said. He slid off the hood of the car. Let's go. The approach was designed carefully. Every heavy hitter was positioned, Thor a quarter-mile overhead, Captain Marvel further out at altitude, Iron Man on the eastern vector, Cyclops and Storm on the ground flanking, all with strict instructions not to engage unless the creature made a directed move toward Marcus. Not reactive movement, not proximity response, directed. Steve Rogers was 60 meters back with the shield, and the specific expression he wore when he was prepared to move faster than anyone thought he could. Danny Ito was at the perimeter running comms, because Natasha had told him to stay there, and this time the instruction had stuck, possibly because she had looked at him differently when she said it, not like a junior analyst to be managed, but like a person she was asking a favor of. Marcus walked forward alone. Doomsday was on Amsterdam Avenue, 2 blocks from the northern evacuation boundary. He had stopped not because of any tactical intervention, but because there was a collapsed building across the avenue from an earlier structural failure, and he was apparently assessing it with that blank, geological patience. In the amber light of the emergency floods that S.H.I.E.L.D. had deployed along the perimeter, he looked like something from before human memory, a shape that the world had made before it learned to make anything smaller. Marcus stopped 20 meters away. He did not hold out his hand this time. He just stood there. For 4 seconds nothing happened. Steve's hand tightened on his shield. Thor's grip on Mjolnir shifted. Tony's repulsors powered up to 30% with the specific silent efficiency of trying to be ready without being visible. Doomsday turned. He looked at Marcus the way he had looked at Reed Richards' sensor array, with that total, consuming attention. But the response was different. With the array, the attention had produced a countermeasure. With Marcus, the attention produced stillness. A quality of waiting that sat very oddly on a creature that had not waited for anything since it arrived. Marcus said quietly. I know you don't understand me. He was right. But he kept talking anyway in the same low-level tone his mother used with animals in distress, not because the words carried meaning, but because the tone did. You came through something, Marcus said. Something pulled you here and dropped you in the middle of everything, and everything here hit you and you hit back because that's what you know. That's all you know. He paused. But nothing here is your enemy. Not really. We're just in the way. Doomsday had not moved 20 meters. 19. Marcus was walking slowly, without conscious decision, closing the distance the way you close distance with something you are not afraid of and want to show that you are not afraid of. 15 meters. We need you to stop, Marcus said. Just stop. Just here. Just stop here. 10 meters. Doomsday lowered his head. Not in submission, in the way that something very large sometimes lowers its head when it is paying a specific kind of attention. The bone protrusions along his spine settled slightly, a micro-movement that the perimeter sensors caught and that Danny Ito flagged on the tactical display with a single word, reduced 8 meters. Marcus stopped. They looked at each other, or Marcus looked, and Doomsday did whatever Doomsday did that was functionally similar to looking. For 11 seconds that nobody at the perimeter breathed through. Then Doom's second retrieval unit hit Doomsday with a concentrated plasma lance from a rooftop 3 blocks south. Later, the inquiry would determine that the unit had been in position for 40 minutes, waiting for an opening, and that Doom had given the order when the creature's reduced aggression state appeared on his own sensors as a containment opportunity. The reasoning was tactically coherent, the execution was precise, and the consequences were catastrophic. Doomsday's head came up. The stillness evaporated. The bone protrusions along his spine extended to their full length and beyond new growth, a centimeter per second, sharp and dense and oriented outward in every direction. His eyes, which had been almost quiet, went to something that was not rage exactly, but was the absolute absence of the stillness. He roared. It was the first sound he had made since arriving. It was not a sound that had a comfortable place in the auditory experience of anything that had evolved on Earth. Every window in a 4-block radius shattered simultaneously. 2 of the shield perimeter vehicles rocked on their chassis. Danny Ito grabbed the edge of the command table and held on. Marcus was still 8 meters away. Natasha moved. She crossed the distance in under 2 seconds and pulled Marcus back with one arm while her body went between him and the creature, which was a physical fact and not a tactical calculation. It simply happened in the order that her instincts dictated. Marcus went. She stayed in front. Doomsday looked at her. She looked back. Now, she said into comms, everything hit at once. Thor came down from altitude with Mjolnir trailing lightning that lit the street like daylight and struck Doomsday's left shoulder with the forbidden technique. A rotational strike that introduced a torsional force the creature had not experienced, targeting the structural articulation of the joint rather than the surface. Captain Marvel hit from the east with a photon burst modulated to a frequency she had never used in combat before. Storm sent a lightning bolt of her own, not from the sky, from the ground, reversed polarity, something she had never attempted because the physiological cost was significant and the atmospheric disruption was difficult to predict. Cyclops hit the knee joint with a sustained optic beam modulated in a rotating frequency pattern, never the same wavelength twice, cycling faster than the adaptation mechanism could track. Iron Man dropped a containment field, not a weapon, not an attack, a specifically engineered electromagnetic lattice designed by Reed and Bruce in the last 3 hours to interact with the adaptation mechanism's own energy output, turning the creature's adaptation process back on itself. Doomsday went down. Not onto one knee this time, onto both. The ground cracked beneath the impact. He was on his hands and knees in the middle of Amsterdam Avenue with 6 of the most powerful beings on Earth holding him there through a combination of techniques he had not yet fully catalogued. And for 12 seconds, 12 full seconds, he stayed down, then he got up. Of course he got up, but he got up differently. The adaptation had processed all 6 simultaneous attacks, and the processing had taken longer than anything previous, 12 seconds versus the 3 to 5 second norm. which Reed, watching from the perimeter, clocked immediately. Combinatorial approach, he said into comms. Multiple genuinely novel stimuli simultaneously. The adaptation mechanism handles them sequentially, not in parallel. It has a processing bottleneck. He was already calculating. If we can generate enough novel simultaneous stimuli to saturate the bottleneck, we can extend the window, Bruce said beside him. To what? Tony asked over comms. Unknown, but longer than 12 seconds. That's something, Steve said. That's everything, Reed said. If we can extend the window far enough, we can introduce something it can't adapt to, Bruce said quietly. He and Reed looked at each other with the specific expression of two people who had just thought the same thing and were not entirely comfortable with it. Tony asked. Neither of them answered immediately. What they had thought, and what they would spend the next 2 hours building, was this. The adaptation mechanism processed damage, modified biology to prevent recurrence, and moved on. It was reactive. It required an input to generate an output. But the mechanism itself, the underlying biological process that drove the adaptation, was a system. And systems had failure modes. If you could find the failure mode of the adaptation mechanism itself, you didn't need to find an attack Doomsday couldn't adapt to. You needed to find an attack the adaptation mechanism couldn't process without breaking itself. It was the most dangerous idea either of them had had in years, which was genuinely saying something. Meanwhile, the meeting coordinates over the Atlantic were still waiting. The breach was still open. And the signal, the greeting, the proposal of exchange had repeated 3 times since the initial transmission, each iteration identical, patient, unhurried. We have observed. We are interested. The specimen performs as calculated. We propose exchange, Fury called Hill at midnight. President has been briefed on the transmission, he said. All of it. The dimensional physics differential, the meeting request, the implication that whoever sent the creature is operating at a level above us. A pause. He's authorizing the meeting. Goes, Hill asked. Rogers, Fury said. Romanoff, Richards, and whoever you think should be in the room when we find out what they want. What about the creature? Manage it until the meeting produces answers. Another pause. And Maria, find out if there's a way to send it back that doesn't require their cooperation. I want options that don't depend on the goodwill of people who used a Category Omega entity as a calling card. He ended the call. Hill stood in the mobile command unit and looked at the tactical display, Doomsday's position, the perimeter, the breach glowing over 6th Avenue, the Atlantic coordinates blinking patient and steady 38 miles out. Danny Ito was at his station, running projections. He had been there for 12 hours. He looked, she thought, like someone who had stopped noticing that he was tired, which meant he was past tired and into something more durable. Ito, she said. He looked up. On the Atlantic team, she said. Liaison and analysis. He blinked. I'm not a field agent. Romanoff says you're useful, Hill said. That's a higher bar than field certification. She turned back to the display. Get some sleep in the next 3 hours. You won't get any after. He did not point out that 3 hours was not enough sleep. He understood that it was the amount available, and that available was what mattered. Outside, in the amblelit urban wilderness of a city half evacuated and wholly changed, Doomsday stood still on Amsterdam Avenue. The perimeter held. The teams rotated. Thor remained overhead, patient as geology, because some things required endurance rather than force, and he had endurance in quantities that made the concept feel personal. Marcus Webb sat at the secondary perimeter and watched, and said nothing, and understood something about what he had seen in those 11 seconds that he did not yet have words for. In the deep dark over the Atlantic, 38 miles out, something waited at coordinates chosen with care. And through the breach above 6th Avenue, in a universe where everything was 60 times heavier and harder and more absolute, shapes moved in configurations that suggested patience of the long-term variety. The kind of patience that had all the time it needed, because it knew, with the calm certainty of something that had seen many universes and assessed many species, that the next 12 hours would determine everything about what came after. The Atlantic meeting happened at dawn. 3 Quinjets flew out in formation, low over the water, running dark, no transponders. No external lighting, just the grey pre-sunrise ocean below and the coordinates blinking steady on every navigation display. Steve sat in the forward compartment with his shield across his knees, and the specific stillness he maintained before things that could not be prepared for through planning alone. Natasha was beside him, reviewing Reed's dimensional physics briefing on a tablet with the focused efficiency of someone who knew she would not understand all of it, and was identifying the parts she needed. Reed himself was in the rear compartment, running last-minute calculations on a secondary sensor array he had built overnight to replace the one Doomsday had burned out. Danny Ito sat across from Reed and tried to be useful by not asking questions Reed was already answering for himself. "Good at that," Reed said without looking up. "At what? Being quiet when quiet is what's needed." Reed made a notation. "It's rarer than people think." Danny did not know what to say to that, so he was quiet, which apparently proved the point. The coordinates resolved to open ocean, featureless in every direction, the horizon a clean line between grey water and grey sky. The Quinjets circled once, nothing visible. Hill was on comms from the mobile unit, Fury patched in from a location he had not specified. Then the water opened, not violently, with the same deliberate, unhurried quality that had characterized every communication from the other side of the breach. A circle of ocean, perhaps 200 meters in diameter, simply descended, pressed down by something invisible, until a flat depression of calm water sat in the middle of the surrounding sea. At its center, a structure rose. It was not a ship. It was not a building. It was a geometric form that suggested both without being either, all right angles and dark surfaces that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, perhaps 50 meters on each side, hovering 2 meters above the depressed water on nothing visible. Along its upper edge, a line of pale illumination that was close to white but leaned towards something else, something in the color range that the journalist at the press conference 2 days ago had tried to describe and failed. "That's the same energy as the breach," Tony said over comms from the third Quinjet. He had insisted on coming despite Hill's objection that the meeting was supposed to be small, and his argument that someone needed to be able to assess the technology in real time had been sound enough that the objection had not survived. Same dimensional signature. They brought a piece of the universe with them. "You read anything from it?" Steve asked, working on it. "What I can tell you is that whatever is powering that structure is operating on physical principles. I don't fully have the math for yet. Give me time." "May not have time," Natasha said. A door opened in the structure's face. Not a sliding door, not a hatch. The surface simply became an opening, geometry rearranging without visible mechanism. From inside, light spilled out that was warmer than the exterior illumination, and in it, 3 figures walked forward onto a platform that extended from the threshold to meet them. They were humanoid. Broadly, the proportions were not quite right by Earth standards, too tall, too densely built, with a stillness of posture that suggested either extraordinary physical control or a different relationship with gravity than humans had. Their features were regular, almost architectural, with the quality of faces that had been produced by selection pressures that valued durability over expressiveness. They wore something that was simultaneously armor and clothing, dark and close-fitting, with the pale illumination running along the joints. The one in the center was taller than the others by half a head. When it spoke, the sound was complex, layered frequencies that the translation algorithm Tony had running processed with a 2-second delay into English that was correct but oddly cadenced, like language that had been learned from observation rather than lived experience. "You are the representatives of this universe's management structure," it said. Statement, not question. "We are representatives of the people who live here," Steve said, "which is a different thing." A pause. Central figure processed this. The distinction is noted. It is consistent with observed behavioral patterns. It looked at each of them in sequence, a systematic assessment that was not unfriendly but was completely clinical. "You engaged the specimen for 41 hours. Adaptation rate exceeded projections by 17%. Your universe's creative problem-solving under pressure is above baseline for your developmental stage. The specimen, Natasha said. Doomsday, your designation. Adequate in our classification, it holds a different designation corresponding to its function. What function? Reed asked. Assessment. The word landed in the silence over open water with considerable weight. You sent it here to assess us, Steve said. Correct. Standard first contact protocol for universes in the developmental range your universe currently occupies. The specimen is deployed. Response is observed and measured. Conclusions are drawn regarding the universe's readiness. Readiness for what? Natasha asked. What comes next? The figure said. And then it paused, and something in its expression shifted, the first departure from total clinical flatness. This is the point at which we propose exchange. We have assessed. We have found your universe to be of sufficient interest. We propose a relationship of mutual benefit. Define mutual benefit, Reed said. We possess knowledge of dimensional physics, energy systems, and biological engineering that your universe will not develop independently for approximately 3,000 years at current trajectory. In exchange, your universe possesses something we do not. Steve asked. The figure looked at him directly. Improvisation, genuine creative adaptation under conditions of novel pressure. Every universe we have assessed at your developmental stage has responded to the specimen in one of 4 patterns. You have responded in a 5th pattern that we have not previously observed. Another pause. The boy, Quinjet cockpit went very quiet. Marcus Webb, Natasha said. Non-combatant juvenile who approached the specimen without weapons or augmentation and induced a sustained pause response through behavioral rather than physical means. The figure's head tilted slightly. In 47 previous assessments across 47 universes, no organic being has induced a pause response in the specimen through non-physical means. The specimen's architecture does not permit it. The architecture apparently permitted it here. It looked at Natasha. Wish to understand why. He's a 17-year-old kid who works at an animal rescue, Tony said over comms, unable to help himself. The figure turned toward the source of the voice even though Tony was in a Quinjet 200 meters away. Yes, this is precisely what we do not understand, and what we wish to. Steve stood up straighter. The boy is not part of any exchange. He's a civilian. He's not available for study, examination, or any other purpose you have in mind. Are not requesting custody, the figure said. We are requesting understanding. The difference is significant. Then explain it, Natasha said. We do not want the boy. We want to understand the quality in your universe that produced his response. The specimen's pause response was not produced by the boy's biology. It was produced by something in the interaction between his psychology and the specimen's fundamental architecture, an architecture we designed and built and know completely. Which means the variable is not the specimen, the variable is your universe. The figure paused. Something in this universe's fundamental nature produced a response in our specimen that our universe cannot produce. We find this worth understanding. Reed had been very still throughout this exchange. Now he said, the 60 times magnitude differential. Figure looked at him. Your universe operates at 60 times the fundamental force magnitude of ours, Reed said. Everything in your universe is stronger, denser, more absolute, including, presumably, the emotional and psychological architecture of conscious beings. He was working through it as he spoke. In a universe where everything is 60 times more powerful, subtlety is not selected for. Gentleness, the specific quality of non-threatening presence. These things don't survive in an environment where 60 times the force is normal. Figure was still. You built something, Reed said, that you cannot reach the way Marcus reached it, because you cannot produce the quality required to reach it. Your universe doesn't make that quality, it selects against it. A very long pause. This is the insight we sought to acquire through exchange, the figure said finally. You have provided it without negotiation. This is also consistent with the 5th pattern. What do you actually want? Steve asked. Not the study, the real ask. Return the specimen, Steve said. Close the breach, end the assessment. The figure said, in exchange for the knowledge package we described, 3,000 years of your developmental trajectory available now. If we decline the exchange, Natasha asked. specimen remains, the breach remains. A second assessment begins using a different specimen. The figure's voice did not change in tone or temperature. We are not threatening, we are describing the protocol. The protocol is not contingent on your cooperation. Your cooperation affects only the quality of the outcome. Steve looked at Natasha. She looked back, the kind of look that carried a full conversation in under a second. We need 12 hours to consult, Steve said. You have 6, the figure said. The specimen's adaptation rate is accelerating. At current trajectory, in approximately 9 hours, it will have developed sufficient countermeasures to your universe's full offensive capability that retrieval will require methods that will cause collateral damage to your universe's infrastructure that we would prefer to avoid. They left. The structure did not watch them go, or if it did so without visible indication. It simply remained, sitting on its depression of calm water in the middle of the Atlantic, pale light running along its upper edge, waiting with the patience of something that had done this 47 times before, and understood that 6 hours was a generous window. On the Quinjet, nobody spoke for 90 seconds. Then Tony said, "For the record, I think the knowledge package is extremely tempting." "Noted," Steve said. 3,000 years of physics and biology and dimensional engineering, Tony continued. "That's not nothing. It's also not free," Natasha said. "Nothing that looks that good in the first 5 minutes is free." "Reed," Steve said. "You're Reed." Reed had been looking out the Quinjet window at the receding structure. "They're telling the truth," he said. "Everything they said is consistent with the physics. The assessment protocol, the force differential, the adaptation mechanism, it all holds together. I don't think they're lying," Steve said. "But a relationship with a civilization that operates at 60 times our power level and uses category omega entities as calling cards is not a relationship we enter in 6 hours based on a first meeting," Reed said. "Whatever we decide carefully, and we don't decide it because we're on a clock they set." "Agreed," Steve said. He clicked to the command channel. "Hill, you heard all of that." "Every word," Hill said. "Fury, get the president. Get Xavier and Banner and everyone we have. We have 6 hours and I want every option on the table in the first 30 minutes. "Copy," Hill said. "And Roger's Doomsday is moving again. Whatever happened when the meeting started, the relative calm ended when your Quinjets left the coordinates. It's heading northeast now, toward the breach." Steve processed this. "It's trying to go home." "That's Banner's read too," Hill said. "It's orienting toward the dimensional signature. The breach is its reference point." "We use that?" Natasha asked. "Banner thinks so," Hill said. "He and Richards need to talk." Reed was already on the line with Bruce before Hill finished the sentence. Back in Manhattan, the situation had developed its own momentum. The adaptation rate acceleration that the alien figures had described was visible in real time. Doomsday moving northeast was Doomsday moving with a specificity of direction it had not shown before. Not the broad orientation of before, but a locked vector, straight-line navigation toward the breach's dimensional signature. The perimeter teams that had maintained containment through the night were running on no sleep and depleted resources, and the novel stimuli available for the combinatorial approach were running out despite every effort at variety. Thor had not slept. He did not look like someone who needed to, which was either reassuring or alienating depending on your perspective. He had maintained altitude watch through the night with Mjolnir and the specific patience of someone for whom time worked differently, and when Steve's Quinjet landed and Steve looked up at him, Thor came down. "Meeting," Thor said. "Later," Steve said. "Right now I need you for something." The creature is heading for the breach. If it reaches the breach before we have a plan, it either goes through on its own terms, or it doesn't go through at all and we've lost our best option. Steve looked up at him. "I need it slowed, not stopped, slowed. Without novel attack, everything novel is being saved for the final window. I need duration, I need endurance." Thor looked northeast toward the creature's path. "You are asking me to stand in front of it and take what it gives," he said. "Yes," Thor nodded once. "I have done harder things." He went. What followed was 40 minutes that nobody who witnessed it forgot. Thor alone on Amsterdam Avenue between Doomsday and the breach, not attacking, receiving. Taking every strike, every charge, every impact, and not fighting back in kind, but redirecting, absorbing, using Mjolnir as a deflection tool rather than a weapon. Not trying to stop the creature, trying to cost it time. Every 10 seconds of engagement was 10 seconds Reed, and Bruce had to finish what they were building. He was hit 17 times in 40 minutes. By the end, his armor was gone in 3 places. His left arm was fractured in 2 locations that he did not mention to anyone, and his lip had been split and resealed twice. He did not retreat. He retreated forward, giving ground slowly, step by step, the way a door gives against a tide, not breaking but bending. Marcus Webb at the perimeter watched this and said nothing. His hands were in his pockets, and his expression was the one he had worn since the beginning, not fear, not awe, something more complicated than either. Danny Ito was beside him, having come back from the Atlantic Quinjet to the perimeter on Hill's instruction to maintain liaison with the ground team. "What are you thinking?" Danny asked. "That it's going home," Marcus said. "It knows the door is open. It wants to go through." He paused. "We should let it." "That's what they're trying to arrange," Danny said. "I know," Marcus said. "I just mean I hope we do it soon. I don't think it should be here. I don't think it's..." He stopped. "Happy," Danny offered. Marcus looked at him. "I was going to say comfortable, but yeah, something like that." Reed and Bruce finished at 6:47 a.m. with 11 minutes to spare before the alien figure's deadline recalculated based on the creature's current adaptation rate. What they had built was not a weapon, it was a key. The adaptation mechanism, as Reed had identified, processed damage sequentially. Its bottleneck was the number of novel simultaneous stimuli it could handle before the processing time extended past the window. What Reed and Bruce had found in the overnight data from the combinatorial approach was something more specific. The mechanism had a resonance frequency. A particular combination of simultaneous inputs at a particular ratio that, instead of triggering adaptation, triggered feedback, the mechanism trying to adapt to its own adaptation signal, processing itself in a loop that would not cause damage but would cause something functionally similar to a full system pause, 3 to 7 seconds. Long enough to open the breach wider. Long enough for whatever mechanism the other side was using to reach through and pull the specimen back. The risk was this: the resonance approach required every available power source hitting simultaneously at exact ratios. Every heavy hitter, every energy source perfectly coordinated. If the ratios were off by more than 4%, the feedback didn't occur and they had used every novel stimulus they had left on a failed attempt, leaving nothing for a second try. "One shot?" Steve asked. Reed and Bruce looked at each other. "Ready," Reed said. Steve got on all channels. Every team, every faction, every unit that had spent the last 41 hours managing the impossible. He told them what was needed. He told them the ratios. He told them there was one attempt and the coordination had to be exact. "Thor," he said, "I need you to fall back. You've done enough." "I will fall back," Thor said, his voice carrying the specific quality of someone who was hurt and not saying so when the moment is past. "Then fall back in 30 seconds, Steve said. Agreed. Tony ran the coordination algorithm from the suit. Captain Marvel took her position. Storm took hers. Every energy source was calibrated. Reed's frequency specifications went out to every unit with the capability to match them. Marcus Webb stood at the perimeter and watched. Doomsday was on 59th Street, 2 blocks from the breach. Thor gave ground one last step at a time, and then, at Steve's signal, threw himself sideways with everything he had left, not fleeing, creating space, clearing the firing solution. "Now," Steve said, everything fired. The resonance approach produced a sound that had no natural analog, a frequency that sat at the intersection of every energy type deployed simultaneously, a chord struck on an instrument the size of a city block. It hit Doomsday at full combined power, and the adaptation mechanism received it and began processing and found its own signal in the input, and turned inward, and the feedback loop engaged. Doomsday stopped, not slowed. Stopped. Complete cessation of movement, mid-stride, 1 foot raised. Frozen in the amber light of morning on 59th Street with all the bone protrusions fully extended, and all the adapted hide at maximum density, and all of it held in a stillness that lasted 1 second. 2, 3 Tony had the breach controls running on the suit. Reed had spent the night reverse engineering the dimensional membrane transmission technology well enough to send one signal, through the breach to the other side. The signal was 3 components: the specimen's dimensional signature, a retrieval request in the structural format the alien civilization used, and coordinates. He sent it at second 4. At second 5, the breach widened, not gradually, completely from 2 meters to 15 in a single expansion, the dark energy crackling outward in a circle of light that washed the street in that unnameable color and turned every shadow strange. At second 6, something came through the breach from the other side. Not a figure, not a structure. An effect, a field of the same pale alien illumination, extending outward from the breach in a cone that reached Doomsday's position and encompassed it completely. Doomsday shuddered, the feedback loop ended. The adaptation mechanism restarted. Doomsday's head came up and the empty ancient eyes found the breach, and in them, for the first and only time, something changed. Not recognition exactly. Not relief, but an orientation toward the light that was different in quality from every other orientation he had shown. He walked into it, not charging, not fighting, walking with that same heavy, unhurried pace into the cone of alien light toward the breach and through. The breach closed behind him in under 3 seconds. The dark energy dissipated. The crackling stopped. Above 6th Avenue, the sky was simply sky, early morning blue. A few clouds. The ordinary light of an ordinary sun doing its ordinary work, for a long moment. Nobody said anything, then Tony said, quietly, "That's everyone buying breakfast." Nobody laughed, but a few people in a few locations across the perimeter and in the mobile command unit and in the Quinjets and on the rooftops exhaled in ways that had been waiting 41 hours to happen. Marcus Webb sat down on the sidewalk and put his face in his hands. Not crying, just stopping. Just finally stopping. Danny Ito sat down next to him. He did not say anything for a while. The sun came up over Manhattan properly, and the city, which had been holding its breath for 2 days, began the tentative process of resuming itself. "Your dad's going to want to talk to you," Danny said eventually. "I know," Marcus said. "What are you going to tell him?" Marcus thought about this. He thought about the 11 seconds on Amsterdam Avenue, and the quality of attention that had come from those ancient empty eyes, and the feeling, he could not prove it, would never be able to prove it, would spend a long time thinking about it. The feeling of something very large and very lost, momentarily recognizing something it had never encountered before, and not knowing what to do with the recognition. "Going to tell him it wasn't angry," Marcus said. "I don't think he'll understand that. But I'm going to tell him anyway." Across the Atlantic, 38 miles out, the structure remained on its depression of calm water. The deadline had passed. The exchange proposal was still open. The pale light ran along its upper edge. It was waiting for an answer. The answer took 3 days, not because the decision was unclear. Steve had known what he thought within an hour of the Atlantic meeting, and Fury had known within 2, and the president had known within 4, but needed the appearance of deliberation for reasons that were political rather than substantive. The 3 days were for the thing that came after knowing, the process of building consensus across every faction that had been involved, every government that had a claim on the decision, every voice that reasonably argued it deserved to be heard before humanity committed to a relationship with a civilization that used Category Omega entities as business cards. It was, in Tony's assessment, the most exhausting 3 days of diplomatic work in human history, which was saying something given that human history included the Congress of Vienna and the Treaty of Westphalia, and the time he had personally negotiated a ceasefire between 2 Asgardian factions by promising them both the same thing and hoping they didn't compare notes. The structure waited. The pale light ran along its upper edge. It did not send follow-up transmissions. It did not apply pressure. It simply waited, with the patience of something that had done this 47 times, and understood that the deliberation was part of the process. On the second day, Reed Richards flew out to the coordinates alone in a single Quinjet. and sat in the water 200 meters from the structure for 4 hours, running every sensor array he had, thinking the kind of thoughts that he only thought when no one was watching, not about the physics, which he understood as well as anyone on Earth could, but about the implications. About what it meant to exist in a universe that was one of at least 48 assessed, one of potentially thousands or millions, a universe that a more advanced civilization had filed under developmental range, and watched with the clinical interest of a naturalist watching a species that didn't yet know it was being observed. He flew back without having gone inside, and without having answered the question he had gone to ask himself. Sue met him on the landing pad. "Well," she said. "We're very small," he said. "We've always been very small," she said. "Yes," he said, "but now we know it." She took his hand. They stood on the landing pad while the sun went down over the Atlantic and the structure's pale light became visible in the darkening distance, and Reed Richards, who had the most comprehensive understanding of the situation of anyone alive, stood with his wife's hand in his and did not have an answer. On the third day, Steve Rogers flew out. He went alone, without sensors, without analysis equipment, with his shield on his back and the same expression he wore before things that could not be prepared for. He walked into the structure when the door opened. He stood in the pale light interior, which was larger than the exterior geometry suggested it should be, and faced the central figure, who was waiting in the same position it had occupied 3 days before, as if it had not moved in the interval. "We've decided," Steve said. "We know," the figure said. "Then why?" "Protocol requires verbal confirmation," the figure said. "We know the answer from your approach. You came alone and without instruments. The answer is no." "The answer is not yet," Steve said. "There's a difference." Figure was still for a moment. "Explain the distinction." "No means never. Not yet means we're not ready. We haven't earned it. Whatever you're offering, 3,000 years of knowledge we haven't developed. We'd be taking something we don't understand from people we've known for 3 days, in exchange for something we don't fully know the value of." Steve paused. "We've made that kind of deal before. It doesn't end well. You are refusing an advantage." "We are refusing a shortcut," Steve said. "There's a difference there too." Figure looked at him with the same systematic clinical assessment it had applied at the first meeting, and then something happened in its expression that had not happened before, a shift that was subtle enough to miss if you weren't watching for it, which Steve was. "In 47 assessments," the figure said, "no representative has refused the knowledge package." "What did the other 47 do?" 22 accepted immediately. 19 accepted after deliberation. 6 attempted to take the knowledge package by force, which was not successful. A pause. "You are the first to decline." "How did the 22 who accepted immediately turn out?" Steve asked. A longer pause. "The assessment period is ongoing. Outcomes are not yet final." Steve said, because there was clearly a but. "The immediate acceptance cohort shows a statistically significant pattern of what we classify as dependency development," the figure said. "Reliance on externally provided solutions rather than internally generated ones. The effect on creative adaptive capacity is..." It stopped. "This is not information we provide during assessment protocol. You're providing it now. You asked a question that warranted an honest answer," the figure said. "We do not lie, we omit when protocol requires. You have asked in a way that protocol does not cover." Steve stood in the pale light and thought about 47 universes and the ones that had taken the shortcut and what had happened to their fifth pattern, their improvisation, their specific creative capacity to respond to novel pressure in ways that could not be predicted. "Close the breach," Steve said. "Permanently, whatever maintenance you've been doing to keep it open, stop. Let it seal. The relationship, when we've earned it," Steve said. "When we've developed enough that the exchange is between equals and not between a teacher and a student who's been given the answers." He paused. "Come back in 100 years, see where we are." 100 years is not long," Steve said, "but it's enough to find out if we're the kind of people worth knowing." Figure looked at him for a long moment. "Fifth pattern," it said quietly, not to Steve, to itself, or to whatever was listening on its end. "Confirmed." Steve walked out of the structure into the Atlantic morning, boarded his Quinjet, and flew back to Manhattan. Behind him, the structure descended into the ocean in the same unhurried way it had risen, the water closing over it without turbulence, leaving the surface unbroken and ordinary. At 6th Avenue, the residual energy signature of the breach dissipated over the following 6 hours, leaving a faint discoloration in the tarmac that tourists would photograph for years without knowing what had caused it. The aftermath of 41 hours of Category Omega engagement was, by any measure, extraordinary. 17 city blocks required structural assessment before reoccupation. 4 buildings were condemned. The infrastructure damage ran to figures that the city's budget office released in a document written in the careful language of people who have looked at a number for a long time and are still not comfortable with it. The human cost was, by some miracle of evacuation efficiency, and the creature's fundamental disinterest in targeting individuals, limited to 47 injuries, none fatal, a fact that the press called miraculous and that Maria Hill called the result of 3,000 personnel executing an evacuation plan under impossible conditions, which she felt was a more accurate description of miracles in general. Shield's After Action review ran to 400 pages. The key finding, buried in the appendices where key findings often hide in documents of that length, was a single line that Bruce Banner had written and that Reed Richards had reviewed, and that neither of them had wanted to put in the executive summary because it was the kind of sentence that caused problems. The adaptation mechanism, at the rate of acceleration observed in the final 12 hours of engagement, would have achieved resistance to the full combined offensive capacity of every documented power in the known Marvel universe within approximately 72 additional hours. The review board read this finding, then they read it again, then the room was quiet for a while. Victor Von Doom read the after-action review, not the Shield version, which he obtained through channels he declined to specify, but his own version, compiled from his tunnel unit's data and his tower observation, and the 3 hours of encrypted channel conversation with Reed Richards that had produced more genuine intellectual exchange than the previous decade of adversarial interaction. He sat with it for a long time. The retrieval unit failure in the tunnel had not strung because it had failed. Doom's plans failed occasionally. This was the nature of ambitious plans operating in complex environments. It had strung because it had broken the moment with the boy, and the moment with the boy had been the single most interesting thing that had happened in the entire 41-hour engagement, and Doom had been the one to end it. He did not apologize. Doom did not apologize. But he filed the fact away in the part of his mind that kept track of errors made in pursuit of advantage, and he thought about it more than he thought about the creature itself, the boy's response. The pause. The 11 seconds. He thought about what it meant that the most sophisticated biological weapon in another universe had responded to a 17-year-old from Westchester who worked at an animal rescue in a way that every engineered weapon and combined offensive had failed to replicate. He thought about this for a long time. He did not reach out to Marcus Webb. That would have been inappropriate, and more practically, it would have attracted the kind of attention that complicated future plans. But he thought about it. The relationships that had formed over 41 hours were in their way, the most durable consequence of everything that had happened. Thor returned to Asgard for 3 days to have the fractures in his left arm addressed by healers, because he had finally admitted to them on day 2 of the aftermath when the arm had become difficult to ignore. He returned to Earth on the 4th day and found Steve at the Avengers Tower looking out over the city and stood beside him without saying anything for a while. "You should have told me about the arm," Steve said. "You had sufficient concerns," Thor said. "That's not how this works." Thor agreed. "It is not." He looked out over the city. "The creature, do you think it knew at the end when it walked through?" Steve considered this. "I think something knew," he said. "I don't know if it was knowing the way we mean it." "Boy thought it was lost," Thor said. "Yeah, I have been lost," Thor said. "Not in the geographical sense, in the other sense." He paused. "It is a specific kind of suffering. I did not expect to find it recognizable in something like that." Steve did not say anything. Sometimes the right response to Thor being honest about difficult things was simply to be present for it, and he had learned this. "I hope it found its way home," Thor said. "Me too," Steve said. Storm and the X-Men returned to Westchester on the second day. The school was intact. The students were safe, evacuated to the secondary facility upstate, and now filtering back in buses that Scott supervised from the front steps with a clipboard, and the expression of a man who had spent 2 nights managing a Category Omega entity and was now managing middle schoolers and finding the transition not entirely different. Xavier was in his study when Aurora came to find him. He was sitting at his desk, and the desk was clear, which was unusual, and he was looking at nothing in particular. "Psychic absence," she said. "The wall, it stayed with you." "Raised a question," Xavier said. "Not about the creature, about the limits of what I consider mind, what I consider reachable." He paused. "I have spent my life believing that consciousness was the common ground, that every mind, however different, could be met at some point of contact." He looked at her. "I spent 41 hours attempting to find the contact point with something that had none, or none that I could access." "Marcus found it," Storm said. "Marcus found something," Xavier said carefully. "Whether it was a contact point or something more like a weather system responding to a change in pressure, I genuinely don't know. But it was real, and it was more than I managed, and I find that." He stopped. "Instructive," he said finally. "I find it instructive." "You find it humbling," Storm said. "Yes," Xavier said without defensiveness. "That too." Marcus Webb had the conversation with his father that he had anticipated, and that went approximately the way he had expected, which was, his father was relieved, then frightened by the retroactive understanding of the risk, then proud in the way that parents are proud when their children have done something extraordinary and terrifying simultaneously. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered the animal rescue, the evacuation, the approach, the 11 seconds, and the nature, fear, and courage in ways that neither of them had previously managed to articulate to each other. At the end of it, his father, who was the Secretary of Defense and a man who had made large decisions under pressure for 20 years, said, "I don't know where you got that." Marcus said. His father nodded. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that tracks." Danny Ito submitted his after-action field report, which technically should not have existed because he was not a field agent and had not been authorized to be in the field, to Maria Hill, who read it, made no comment on the authorization question, and forwarded it to Fury with a single line of her own appended. "This one's worth keeping." Fury's response was 4 words. "Agree, process him properly." 3 weeks later, Danny Ito received a formal SHIELD field agent offer, which he accepted, and which Natasha Romanoff witnessed because she happened to be in the building, and because Hill had sent her a message that said only, "Signing today if you want to be there." She was there. She did not say anything particularly meaningful. She signed as witness and nodded at Danny and left. But she had come, and Danny understood what that meant, which was the same thing it always meant when Natasha Romanoff chose to be present for something, that it mattered, and she was acknowledging that it mattered, and that was the fullest expression of sentiment she reliably offered. He accepted it as the thing it was. The discoloration in the tarmac on 6th Avenue became a landmark within the month. Someone put flowers there, then someone put a small sign. Then the flowers became a regular occurrence, replaced when they wilted, and nobody was sure who was maintaining them. Not an organization, just individuals in rotation, because the spot meant something to people who had been in the city during those 41 hours and needed somewhere to put the meaning. The city rebuilt. Cities always rebuild. Manhattan in particular had a relationship with catastrophe that had long since moved past trauma into something more like professional familiarity. The infrastructure crews knew their protocols. The architects knew the building codes. The community organizations knew their networks. And the ordinary machinery of recovery engaged with the tired, competent efficiency of people who had done this before and would do it again, and had decided somewhere along the way that doing it well was the most honest response available to them. Tony paid for 17 blocks of structural repair out of his own pocket without making a press announcement about it. which was not behavior anyone who knew him superficially would have predicted, and which everyone who knew him well found completely characteristic. He also spent 6 weeks building a detection system for dimensional breaches that could identify the specific energy signature of the other civilization's technology at a range of 48 hours and at a distance of 3 solar systems. He did not tell anyone he was building it. He finished it, tested it, verified it, and then quietly integrated it into the Avengers Global Monitoring Network. When Pepper asked what he was doing, he said, "Making sure we're not surprised again." "By them specifically?" she asked. "By anyone," he said. "In the deep Atlantic, in the place where the structure had been, the water was ordinary. Clean, cold, unremarkable, the same as the millions of square miles of ocean around it. Whatever technology had held that depression in the surface had fully released, and the ocean had reasserted itself with the complete indifference it maintained toward all human and post-human events. But in the dimensional membrane above that spot, invisible, undetectable by any instrument currently on Earth, though not by the detection system Tony would finish in 6 weeks, a residue remained. A thinning. The place where the membrane had been held open for 3 days, then carefully and completely sealed, retained a quality of potential. Not weakness, not a vulnerability, something more like a memory. The membrane knew it had been opened there, and the knowing was written into its structure in a way that would take approximately a century to fully dissipate. 100 years. "Come back in 100 years, Steve had said. See where we are?" The figure had not confirmed it would, but it had not declined either. In 47 universes, across developmental ranges from primitive to advanced, across species and civilizations and forms of consciousness that the Marvel Universe had not yet conceived of, the 5th pattern was noted in whatever passed for records among a civilization that operated at 60 times the fundamental forces of everything around it, noted and watched and found, for reasons the civilization could articulate in physics but not entirely in philosophy, worth returning to. 41 hours, that was the duration of Doomsday's presence in the Marvel Universe, from the moment the sky cracked open above 6th Avenue to the moment he walked through alien light back to wherever he had come from. 41 hours against a universe that had faced Thanos, Galactus, the Beyonder, the Void, and extinction-level threats too numerous and varied to catalogue without a dedicated filing system. And of all those threats across all those events, Doomsday was the only one that left the heroes genuinely uncertain whether they had won, they had survived. That was clear. The breach was closed, the creature was gone, the city was intact in the ways that mattered. By the conventional metrics of superhero engagement, civilian casualties, infrastructure survivability, ultimate containment of the threat, the outcome was a success, but success felt like the wrong word for what had actually happened. What had actually happened was an education. Thor had learned that endurance was not the same as strength, and that standing in front of something and absorbing what it gave was sometimes the most powerful thing available, not because it stopped the thing, but because it bought the time for someone else to find the answer. He had known this abstractly for 1,000 years. He knew it differently now, with 2 healed fractures in his left arm and the memory of 40 minutes on Amsterdam Avenue, giving ground 1 step at a time. Reed Richards had learned the limits of measurement. His entire scientific life had been organized around the principle that everything could be understood if you could find the right instrument to observe it. Doomsday had burned out his sensor array in 3 seconds and raised a question that no instrument could answer. What does it mean to encounter something that exists entirely outside the frameworks you use to understand existence? He did not have the answer. He had the question which he suspected was more valuable. Bruce Banner had learned something he was still processing, which was that the most dangerous thing he had ever helped analyze was not angry, not in any meaningful sense. The adaptation mechanism, the bone growth, the hide reorganization, none of it was rage, it was function. Pure, undirected, magnificent, terrible function. And the most dangerous thing about it was not its power, but its indifference, not malice, not cruelty, simply the absolute absence of the consideration that made coexistence possible. He thought about this in relation to the other guy, quietly, in the way he thought about things he was not ready to say out loud. Natasha Romanoff had learned that the most effective thing she did in 41 hours was sit down next to a teenager on the hood of an abandoned car and listen to him describe an animal rescue. She had built her career on the principle that information and capability were the currencies that mattered. She still believed this. She also believed now that sometimes the most important capability was recognizing when someone else had the information you needed and had arrived at it through a route you could not have taken yourself. Steve Rogers had learned, or perhaps confirmed, because some things he already knew and needed to be reminded of, that the most important decisions were the ones made from principle rather than advantage. 3,000 years of knowledge, offered freely, in exchange for something he could not fully value, the easiest yes in human history. And the right answer was not yet, and the right answer was earn it, and the right answer was come back when we're equals, because shortcuts were not shortcuts, they were just longer routes to the same destination with the understanding removed. And Marcus Webb had learned, or perhaps always known, in the way that some people know things before they have the experience to articulate them, that the most unreachable things are not unreachable because they are too powerful or too alien or too far beyond the capacity of ordinary people to approach. They are unreachable because nobody has tried being present with them without wanting anything, without weapons, without instruments, without an agenda, just present, just there. He would think about those 11 seconds for years. He would think about the fractional head tilt, the quality of attention from those ancient empty eyes, the specific texture of the stillness that had fallen on Amsterdam Avenue when everything else had failed and a 17-year-old had simply stood in the street and said, "I see you. I know you don't understand me. I know you don't want to be here." He would think about it when he was older and doing work that required the same quality, presence without agenda, attention without demand, and he would understand that those 11 seconds had not been an anomaly. They had been a preview. Doomsday himself, whatever Doomsday was, whatever version of experience or non-experience organized the vast biological engine of him, had gone home. Through the breach, through the alien light, back to a universe where everything operated at 60 times the force of this one, where he was known and categorized and managed and used, where his function made sense in the context of the world that had produced him. Whether that was better for him than what he had found in those 11 seconds on Amsterdam Avenue, nobody could say. The question assumed a capacity for preference that nobody had established he possessed, but Thor hoped he had found his way home. And that felt in its way like enough. The Marvel Universe was permanently changed by 41 hours, in ways both visible and invisible. Visibly, the tarmac discoloration on 6th Avenue, the flowers that kept appearing, the condemned buildings that became, in their skeletal state, a kind of accidental memorial to the evacuation that had saved 47,000 lives in under 2 hours. The SHIELD protocols for Category Omega containment were written from scratch. Tony's detection system, quietly running in the background of everything, watching for the specific energy signature of a civilization that operated at 60 times the fundamental forces of this one. Invisibly, a shift in the understanding of what powerful meant. The assembled force of the Marvel Universe, Avengers, X-Men, every faction, every capability had managed 41 hours against something that had been deployed as a probe, an assessment tool, a calling card, not the civilization's best. Not their weapon, their message. The message had been received, and the response not yet, come back when we're equals, 100 years, was either the most courageous thing humanity had ever said to a more powerful force or the most naive, and the difference between those two interpretations would be answered by what humanity did with the 100 years. Tony Stark intended to use every day of them. Reed Richards intended to ask better questions than he had been asking. Bruce Banner intended to be more careful about what he helped analyze, and less careful about what he allowed himself to hope for. Natasha Romanoff intended to keep listening to people who arrived at right answers through routes she could not have taken. Steve Rogers intended to keep saying not yet to shortcuts for as long as it took. And Marcus Webb, 17 years old, son of a Secretary of Defense, volunteer at an animal rescue in Westchester, intended to go home and tell his mother what had happened and help with the animals, and think for a long time about 11 seconds on Amsterdam Avenue, and eventually, in the way that people who have touched something true eventually find their way toward it again, figure out what to do with what he knew. The city rebuilt, the breach closed. The alien structure descended into the Atlantic and was gone. The flowers appeared on 6th Avenue and were replaced when they wilted and appeared again. Somewhere in a universe where everything was 60 times heavier and harder and more absolute, something that had spent its entire existence as a function, as a force, as a tool, as an assessment mechanism deployed through dimensional breaches in service of a civilization's curiosity, carried in whatever it had instead of memory the residue of 11 seconds in which something small and unaugmented and completely unafraid had stood in front of it and offered an open hand. Whether that residue meant anything, nobody could say, but it was there, and in the accounting of a universe that had seen 47 assessments and noted the 5th pattern and found it worth returning to, the smallest things were sometimes the ones that changed the final calculation. The sky above Manhattan was ordinary. Blue, cloudless, the specific quality of autumn light that made the city look like it had been built for exactly this purpose, to catch the light of this particular morning and hold it long enough for people to notice. People noticed, they always had. That was the thing about this universe, the thing that no instrument had measured and no assessment had fully captured, and no civilization operating at 60 times the fundamental forces had entirely understood. It noticed things. It kept noticing, even after everything that had tried to make it stop. That was worth 100 years. That was worth coming back for. Truth and justice prevail. Maury stories await.